One nice thing in the private sector is that you're so efficient, which is great. I mean, coming from research, like my colleague Johan Rockström, we'd like to take time and we need to follow procedures and so on. And I will just ask my panel to be very efficient, and I will ask all 4 of them to come up at the same time and join me on stage. So please give them an applause and so they feel welcome, please. And I will introduce them very quickly and just very shortly. We have Walerud, a serial entrepreneur and angel investor, board members of Creades and CEO of Teclo Networks. And you're also recently an honorary doctorate at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm as well. We have Mr. Leif Johansson, member and former chairman of the European Roundtable of Industrialists, chairman of Ericsson and AstraZeneca, and former CEO of the Volvo Group. We have Mr. Geer, co-founder and CEO of iZettle. And we have Bernard Charlès, CEO of Dassault Systèmes. So please, welcome to the stage. And we are going to talk about this word, which at least I struggle every time in English, digitalization. There you go. I will try to avoid it from now on. You can raise it again. Leif, if I could maybe start with you. We heard from Commissioner Malmström that what is important in terms of trade agreements is also to really look at the sort of needs and possibilities of small and medium-sized companies. When we talk about digitalization, sometimes, at least I feel, that this is more about small and medium-sized companies. Is there a difference when we discuss this issue between large companies and smaller companies? And maybe if you can add, are large companies even part of this rapid transition to a new digitalized society? Do you play a role there?
Well, you covered quite a few things in that question, so let me try to answer it simply. I think first of all, technology is there for everyone, and the beauty of cloud technology, communication technology, and such things is that they make the barriers for getting into business much smaller than used to be. And I can take my own little company, AB Afra, wonderful global group with only 5 employees. But we have everything on the cloud. We don't have a switch, we don't have a computer, we have everything that we can do on the cloud. And it started with 40 crowns per month to start and operate that business, you can say. If I then look at Ericsson or very large companies, we can use technology and communication as a way to bring about better efficiency, but we can also do completely new things which used not to be possible. Let me take an example of AstraZeneca, where the world's largest medicine that have been sold is aspirin. It's 18 atoms. Nowadays, the most common medicines that are being produced are now on the edge of becoming approved, which is immuno-oncology. That's 250,000 atoms in a molecule. That 250,000 atoms, we used not to be able to calculate at all. Now we can actually calculate and simulate how that 250,000 atom molecule behaves in your body. Clearly something completely different. And what's so interesting is that even with the types of computers that we then needed at AstraZeneca, that could then be available to the startup community of the small and medium-sized company, or even individual companies at universities, etc. There is enormous opportunity orientation when it comes to being able to use this smart technology.
But would you say, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that the relationship, some of the technologies that you develop can then also be used by smaller startup companies and so on. Is there a lot of collaboration today? Are actually large companies very open to share technologies, share knowledge, share resources?
I think as a consequence of what we see happening when, with the help of technology, everything becomes global knowledge very, very quickly. If you take large companies like Ericsson and AstraZeneca that I know very well, at AstraZeneca we are beginning to have more than 50% of our R&D budget spent with small and medium-sized companies and with academia. And if you go only 15 or 20 years ago back, that was almost 100% internal only. And very similarly with Ericsson, slightly different in structure, you can say, but similarly. So there is an opening up and the need to be able to be quick and to be able to compete creates ecosystems for small and large companies to actually develop in symbiosis with each other.
Okay, we come back also to this issue of ecosystem, new ecosystem thinking. Leif, when we had a chance to talk a little bit before the conference, you described something that I found very interesting. You call it the smart zone thinking.
Right.
How is that connected with the topic of being a front runner? Is the challenge there that you can't make money if you're a front runner, or what is the problem here?
The smart zone, we usually say when we talk about environmental, is that we know that there will be a regulatory curve and all companies will have to follow that. And it may be so that if we start too early with so-called green products, they become unsellable. But there is a smart zone in between where if we invest earlier in green products before it's actually absolutely necessary, at which time it only becomes cost, then there is a smart zone to develop efficiently and build scale. I think you have a very similar structure if you see it how to use digital. If you do digitalization late as a bank, it will only be cost. If you do it very early, you can actually, as a bank, provide very competitive advantage to your customers. And you have gotten a much better competitive edge on that whole smart investment also in digitalization. So I think the concepts are very similar here. Big changes, the people who are at the earliest to bring about big changes and can live and through even difficult and complex times usually come out in the front in the competitive phase.
And just before I move to our other panelists as well, move forward, but you've been very much linked, you of course have also experience from small companies, but to large companies, Ericsson, AstraZeneca and so on. If we are looking ahead a little bit now, looking 15, 20, 25 years, many of these companies are old, I mean up to 100 years and even more. Will they still be around? Will they play an important role, and will they actually keep up, you think? Or will we see a dramatic shift in this, you could say, corporate world with new companies?
Well, I think first of all, I think there's generally a notion that sort of innovation happens only in small companies. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. And of course, the innovation that fails in small companies we never see. When innovative processes in large companies are not productive, then large companies fail, and there is a number of those. And if you look at the top list of American companies, for example, they have big failures in there. But I think in reality, take a company like Sandvik or Atlas Copco, started about 100 years ago by being able to innovatively drill rock and be able to help the mining industry at that time. If you look at what they have actually done in terms of innovation over those 100 years, it's very, very impressive by any measurements. Take my own company at Ericsson. When I worked at Ericsson in 1983, we were all about switching. To some extent about peripheral equipment, to some extent about central computers. That's not a single product from those days that we actually sell now. Now we are all about mobile broadband and mobile infrastructure. So I think this innovation process is not something that is big or small. It's a culture of the company that you look at.
You may come back a little bit to that because it requires, I guess, somewhat a shift in leadership also and so on.
Absolutely.
But Jane, maybe I can move to you. You are definitely not linked to the large sort of companies in the same way. But you are linked to a special council linked to the Prime Minister in Sweden, looking at innovation and so on, where we also have representatives from large companies. Can you say maybe a few words about this council? What is it when you're looking at the future in terms of innovation? What are the key things you're discussing there? If you give us some insights.
Well, the main challenge is that there are a number of things that don't work as well as they could in Sweden. Sweden has many advantages, but there are things we can do better. And the Innovation Council is trying to make several of those things work better. For instance, public procurement. For instance, digitalization, where we believe that the larger companies have the resources to do something good. They've also recently, the Wallenbergs have invested 1.2 billion crowns in 4 Swedish universities to drive digitalization in the larger companies in Sweden. The very small companies where I'm most at home, we exist because digitalization gives us the possibility of existing, because we can make companies that are successful globally with very small resources. But the ones in between, the ones with a product or two, with customers, with billing, maybe we should do something.
And what is that?
Well, we have several programs we're thinking about. We'll see. There's another meeting soon again, but we're trying to, there's something called Produktionsliftet, the production lift that was successful, the thing to do after lean production with around 20 or 30 companies in Sweden, and we're going to do something similar with some of the other ones. We're doing as much as we can there. We're also doing something about immigration as far as we can. We're doing quite a bit on sustainability if we can. We're trying to remove limits to growth, and I think that also ties into what Minister Malmström was talking about, where the trade agreements are actually enabling growth, removing limits to growth, and the same thing with this organization here. We're trying to remove limits to create contacts, to make trade work, to make businesses grow.
What you're saying, you're trying to find ways of sort of overcoming barriers and so on.
Removing barriers.
Yeah, removing barriers. Would you say that most of these barriers are real, meaning that they are legal, there are financial barriers and so on, or are they more mental barriers? The fact that, you know, we are operating and thinking in such a different way today, but you can't get people to understand how that new, whatever it is, corporate looks like. What are the barriers? Can you give an example of that?
I think that I think that you're right there. That many of the things that mean that I believe that digitalization will happen, but more slowly than those of us in startups think it will happen. At the same time, have much more impact than many of us can believe. That depends just on the slowness of adoption of new productivity-enhancing technology. Often it takes a generational change to actually change the way people work, people organize themselves, people think. And that, I believe we have that. We don't have the time for a whole generation, and that's why we're trying to bring digitalization into the larger companies immediately, bring digitalization into the small and medium-sized companies in Sweden as soon as we possibly can, because we all need more productivity. This is a way to get more productivity. This is a way to keep our living standards up. And people don't know what to do with it.
It's interesting when you sent also a few notes. You sent a very nice little story, and I will ask you to actually tell that story. I mean, you talked about this, as you said now also, that adaptation seems to take longer, but impact seems to be larger, which I think is a very nice way of putting things. But you also sent a little short story about a suitcase.
Oh, okay, yes.
I think that was interesting because it also talks a little bit about business ideas and the business sectors.
Okay, so I don't really know when the wheel was invented, but it's a lot of thousands of years ago. Let's call it 8 or 10,000 years ago. In the same way, people have had things to carry for even longer than that, sort of heavy things to carry, right? So you'd think that people would have thought about putting wheels on things that we carry fairly quickly. But no, it happened 1990. A pilot put wheels on his suitcase. 1990, that's not very long ago, putting wheels on suitcases. Okay? There are a lot of very obvious ideas out there that we don't know yet. That means there are a lot of good businesses out there that we don't know yet, and we're going to say, oh, well, of course we should have put wheels on suitcases or whatever it is quite soon. And that is a lot of what's keeping us back.
Wonderful. I think, I mean, coming back to a couple of things where I would like you to maybe reflect towards the end of the discussion, the whole leadership issue about that, but also as you exemplify here, we can see at another sector in Sweden, the forest industry, or which has completely changed in terms of which businesses they need to work with and find new ideas and combinations. So it's an interesting story, I think. And maybe the mental barriers are sometimes very strong, I guess.
I think the forest industry is interesting in that I have a house where there's a lot of trees, and some of our neighbors cut down trees, and there's a machine that comes to cut down trees in a particular area. And that machine, I think I counted, it takes 7 seconds from grabbing onto a tree to grabbing onto the next tree. It cuts it down, it takes all the branches off, it slices it into the right sections and stacks the sections neatly, and then goes to the next tree, all in 7 seconds. In other words, the efficiency of a process that people understand can be increased just amazingly. What the forest industry has not done is think about quite as much about new products, new, for instance, fabrics that could be made out of forest industry, cellulose, things that aren't quite making things that they already do better, but to do new things.
Thank you very much. Bernard, Dassault Systems, one of the products that you have, which I find extremely fascinating, and I had Leif give me a lecture about actually how fascinating 3D printing is.
Thank you, Leif.
He's a good businessman for you. I can say that. I was completely convinced. I thought it was such a cool thing over there, but I realized it's actually extremely good. It can do many things. And so your company has really been at the forefront of innovation as well. What has managed to keep you at that forefront as a quite large company?
Well, there are many factors. First of all, what I would like to say is make sure everyone keep in mind that innovation is fun. It's not boring, it's fun, and it's accessible to any size of companies. And I'll give you a few anecdotes about that, of course. But the first thing to address your question briefly is, like François Jacob Nobel Prize says, what humankind creates is very often subject to the power of imagination. And what is cool about software, and what is cool about digitalization, is not the digitalization of yesterday. It's the fact that you can now create things that don't work at first, but then you can call friends to collaborate with you to help solve the problem. And just think about it. You can call friends easily using the virtualization to solve problems. So it's the other way around. In the early days, and we did that together with Leif for Volvo and many other companies, it was subject to the big companies to subcontract, to supply certain things. Now, with the power of collaboration online, it's the other way around. You can assemble teams with great people and great knowledge to create or find solutions to realize your dream. I give you a few quick examples. Who would have said, when it started 30 years ago, we made a bet that a 3 million object, by the way, it's called an airplane, could be done without doing physical prototyping and would take off. People said, you're crazy. This will never happen. It did happen. People around the globe came together, put those things together, 3 million parts taking off at the same time, in close formation. No.
Sounds a bit scary, though.
It did work. But I give you this extreme example 30 years ago, which of course has transformed the world of manufacturing. To give you another example, which is another extreme one, which is a very small company in Europe, in fact less than 10 people for the time being. And you know what, as Leif mentioned, they are designing an airplane on the cloud. Who would have said 5 years ago that a team of 10 people would be designing an airplane, it's a small airplane for sure, but that will take off, will be certified in 2016, and this in less than 2 years. So it's the other way around. Another example that shows this extreme possibility is who would have thought that only, let's say, 5 years ago, a team of less than 100 people using this new, I would not call it digitalization, it's the world of collaboration. Coming together would say, I've never done a car, but we are going to do a self-autonomous car together. And we did it. So the barrier to realize our dream has moved in a big way and create an horizon that I think Europe can leverage. And the last example I'll tell you to really illustrate that incredible move is when you think about the last Nobel Prize, I think 2014, if I remember, Martin Karplus. This is about chemistry and about looking at how chemistry can propagate in a human cell. Charm is the modeling. The result of his work was only possible because he could do simulation. Would not have been possible just doing physical tests. He had a dream, almost like Einstein, you know, and think maybe this is right. Tried it, did the modeling and simulation, and we finally demonstrated it could work. So that's what my company is doing every day. Creating this digital environment that can be accessible to fab labs of the world, fab labs in Europe, so people can realize their dream. And you know what? We are in a world where the product is not the value. We are in an economy of usage. We are in an economy of experience. And because we are in an economy of experience, the new world we are building is the sum of physical goods and digital world. And the sum of the two create these new possibilities that I think will change all sectors of the economy. And kids today, if you ask them, show me your dream, they will quickly use software to do the modeling of their imagination, and then they will go to fab labs to do it. That's this new world.
And I assume that this is what the world that you described with these words, makers, movements. I mean, the fact that we are focusing on the things we are needing. Yes.
Yeah. Well, this maker movement is really another part of dream for kids, young generation, because they can actually do things without huge investment. 3D printing existed for 20 years for large companies, but was marginal. You know what happened? In the last years, it became affordable to people, to consumers, to you and I at home. It's changing the world. In fact, it's opening the eyes of large companies that some young teams with just a handful of great imagination can do things, print things, create objects. And that's the maker movement, because it's the proof that from imagination and dream you can realize things quickly. And of course, I'm not saying that they are all ready to be sold, but they are creating an amazing new possibilities. And Europe, from that standpoint, has unique things, because I believe that art, science, and technology are coming together. And don't you think that this is the culture and the value we have in Europe? I think it is. That's the card we need to play.
Thank you very much. Jakob, if I can move to you also. When we talk about sort of innovation, digitalization and so on, we quite often think about IT and so on. We don't necessarily think about the financial markets in general, banks and insurance companies and so on. But what you are arguing, when it comes to, if we're looking at financial technologies, there is an explosion really in innovation and so on. Can you describe that? What is actually happening?
Well, quite a lot is happening actually, and the good thing is that the industry doesn't really seem to realize that it's going on already. It's good for companies like ours that look at this from a different angle. I think the best way to illustrate it is actually that sort of last year alone, I think roughly $14 billion were invested in fintech startups. And fintech is obviously financial technology companies, such as iZettle. It could be Klarna, or it could be TransferWise or similar companies. And all these companies come from the angle that they are extremely vertical. They are best in class of what they do. They're best in terms of payments, they're best in terms of money transfers between countries or lending or whatever it might be. And they're using this new technology, state of the art, could be cloud-based, the best and most modern sort of programming languages, etc. And they're going at this from the sort of a bottom-up situation or solution. And I mean, the consequence of this is that they are effectively going for the traditional incumbents and the banks, the financial incumbents. And I mean, what they are actually up against are companies that have one big sort of solution that fits for your entire life. If you go to a bank, you can effectively get whatever you need for your entire lifetime. But which company today is actually as good at everything what they do so they can provide the best possible solution for you? Normally it's the vertical company that could provide the best solution. I think that's very interesting. And if you look at sort of the predictions for the future, a very recent McKinsey report was talking about the fact that, or at least the hypothesis that in less than 10 years, sort of 50% of the bank sort of profitability pool will be sort of reallocated to companies like ours, because we are so vertical and so focused on the sort of new technology and the core products. So it will be tough to keep up. And obviously it's easy to sit here as an underdog in the industry. Our revenue is probably sort of a marginal error in the sort of bank, the balance sheet. But I think fundamentally that the industry is will be challenged in the next couple of years in the same way that the music industry was challenged with the likes of Spotify 10 years ago. They didn't see it coming, and all of a sudden it hit them, and it's painful.
Are they aware of it? I mean, you have, of course, connections with banks and so on, and I know that you sometimes, as we talked about during lunch, you end up in the same panel as bankers. Are there any bankers in here? Let's see. 50% will be lost over the next, okay, just so you know. But are they aware of this transition? Do you think that they now are waking up and, like other large companies, they will actually quite dramatically change how they operate?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm a big believer in the bank, so I'm not saying that we will take over the world. That's not what I'm saying. I believe that banks have very relevant place in society. I mean, the infrastructure that they have built is extremely relevant. The customer base and the trust that they have is more or less unheard of. So I mean, they have a fantastic sort of foundation for the future. The problem now is that they need to cut off both arms and legs in order to maintain that position going forward. And I'll give you a pretty interesting example. I spent an hour or two a couple of weeks ago looking at what kind of engineering talent banks like SEB, Swedbank and others are looking for. And what struck me as extremely fascinating is that they're all looking for engineers programming in COBOL. And I don't know if you're an engineer in here, COBOL was a programming language that was developed back in 1969. It's not really what we use today. And those are sort of the core competences that banks all over the world are looking for. And you can imagine the challenge with sort of the collaborative industry that you were sort of describing, with people all over the world using the most modern programming languages, using the cloud as you were talking about, and then trying to keep up with the pace of development for someone using technology that sort of was around when we sent the first spaceship to moon. But it's challenging.
But is this, I mean, what you're describing is, of course, as you say, quite niche companies becoming really good compared to banks where you can get everything done. But as a customer, I think that is pretty nice. You know, you go to a bank and you get everything done. Now I have to link up to 32 different apps and so on. Is this all good? Is this really good for the customer, or is it more funny for the inventors?
Well, I think, and I know I'm not trying to be rude here, but both you as well as myself, we're too old.
That's the problem.
Next generation, looking at millennials, that is actually sort of the target group that you should be aiming at as a bank or any industry. I mean, they don't really care about these nice offices and bankers telling them to invest in their own papers. I mean, banking is just an unnecessary evil in many ways. And they're looking for the best deal and the best solution. And the best solution today does not only have to do with the interest rate.
They think they understand the pile of documents they are receiving. They don't understand anything, but they are pleased to receive the documents. And we demonstrated that we could do accident investigation, doing simulation better than themselves. So the world is changing so much that regulators will have to adapt to the new world to learn how much and how better they can do their job. And that's another shaky issue that we have in Europe that we don't have in many other countries. And that's something that I hope will be a good takeaway if some people here are working on the regulation side of it.
Thank you very much. I don't think, I mean, regulators normally are not very happy about being very flexible and adaptive and so on. So I think we have a bit of a challenge there. That's definitely for a panel of the future, not least.
Oh, the FAA recently made a recommendation because, just as a showcase, we presented an human heart in modeling and simulation with electrical signal, muscles, tissues, everything. And they finally came to the conclusion that they will recommend for the future of heart surgery to use a virtual platform. So it can happen.
It can happen. Jacob, what do you say? I mean, you have built a company that actually do employ a lot of people already, very, very rapidly so. Would you think that we are exaggerating when there is a sense that it will be less jobs in the future?
Well, I'm much more positive than you guys.
Of course.
But I'm young and naive.
Exactly.
Maybe. I don't know. No, but I think this next couple of years it's pretty challenging. I mean, what digitalization actually brings to the table is a democratization of entrepreneurship, if you like. Take my company as an example. What we do is that we empower every business, no matter how small it is, to actually start taking payments, which is the fundamenta of any business. And if you look in Europe today, there are roughly, 20 million people unemployed, or I'm sure it's more. We have 20 million companies today in Europe, sole traders and up to 5-10 employees alone, that still do not take card payments. So if we can provide these small companies with tools to grow their business, and if regulators can support them, then we can actually make an impact in terms of unemployment in Europe. I mean, we can't rely on these big, nice companies that you have been part of creating. It's been great, but I mean, it's time to move on, and it's time to sort of decide on our own destiny, if you like. And now it's possible because there are so many great tools. There are so many great financial tools that can help you in this process. You can set up a new company with just $100. You can create a new app. You can distribute it around the world with the help of App Store or Google Play. And for another $100, you can get global marketing. I mean, it's never been easier to start a company than it is today. It's just as difficult to be successful. But I mean, the possibilities today are endless. So I'm much more positive than you guys.
Yes, please, Jane.
Once upon a time, we had a lot of small companies, small farmers who traded. It was sort of like the Shire in Lord of the Rings. And then the large companies started to grow, and they did so because the theory is because it was cheaper to do a deal with somebody who was employed by the same company than it was to do a deal with somebody outside the company. And now those costs are going down very rapidly. So that the reason to be a very large company is getting somewhat smaller, at least if you're basing it on transaction cost. If you're basing it on brand power, that's a different thing. But transaction costs are way lower now. So you can actually have a lot of small companies that can survive by selling to both large and small companies.
Interesting. Thank you very much. We only have 1 minute left, but Leif, you and I discussed a little bit because you also told me a nice, you could say, story from your life, where you could say a shift actually pushed you in terms of business, and it's linking up a little bit to sustainability, environmental issues. Why we are here, also working at COP. I think we have passed the situation we had in the past when companies saw environmental issues as actually something stopping development and rather see them driving. But it was like that. When we had the CFC, sometimes called Freon, we say CFC in France, What happened? Can you just...
You wanted this as a little lead into the next panel there.
In 1 minute, but it's a nice story.
When I was the CEO of Electrolux, we had Greenpeace come by our head office and dump 400 refrigerators out of our outside of the front door and close down effectively the head office. And of course, what they were concerned with was that we were using CFCs, Freon in Swedish, to use to make refrigerators in a most efficient way. And of course, frankly, the biggest pain from that all was not that they closed down the headquarters. The biggest pain that there were very few of us, myself included, realizing that we had a problem. And after having first had a knee-jerk self-defense reflex for a couple of hours there, we decided, Greenpeace is right, let's go do something about this. And it turned out to be one of the greatest commercial successes that we have ever had at Electrolux. So I think it shows how important it is to go with the flow, go with the tide.
Exactly. So if you really want business advice, you should call Greenpeace. Is that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, maybe that is a conclusion.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So thank you very much to the panel. A warm applause, really.